So firstly, before we begin, I want to thank you, Shira Cohen, for asking me to come and speak or to Zoom with you. It's always a pleasure to speak to Bnei Akiva, so thank you very much. I wanted to speak tonight to you about hope. But before we get into kind of a discussion about hope and what is hope and how we see hope and how we define hope and all those things, I wanted to begin with just simply learning a text with you that perhaps might shed some light on how the Torah understands hope. It's a text that is familiar to all of you. You've probably seen it a lot of times, but let's go and have a look at this text. And of course, it's the opening text. It's familiar to you, the opening text of God's first words to Abraham Avinu. Vayomer Hashem el Abraham, lech lecha mi'artzecha u'mimoladetcha u'mibeit avicha el haaretz asher arecha v'escha legoy gadol. Simply, the opening words that Hashem says to Abraham is leave everything, leave your homeland, your father's house, your country, everything, and I am going to make you into a great nation. And he then continues that those who will bless you will be blessed. All the families of the land will be blessed by you. And Abraham does what Hashem asked him. Do any of you by any chance know how many times in the life of Abraham this bracha is repeated? Lech lecha, not the lech lecha, but I'm going to make you a great nation. Is it kind of, any ideas? Do you want to just throw numbers, like once, this is the only time? Any thoughts? Numerous times? Any? Six, okay.
18.
We'll have, okay. Ita, so we've got 6. Ita, how many?
I said 18.
18. You're close. Take off 1.
Actually?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. 17.
17. In fact, wow. Yeah. In fact, 17 times over the course, Hashem keeps on telling Abraham, you're going to inherit this land. And I'm going to make you into a great nation. So we have this is a repetition that occurs for Abraham. Now, when Abraham arrives in the land of Israel, as he follows Hashem, what is one of the first things that actually happened to Abraham when he arrives in the land? If you recall from Sefer Bereshit. So he arrives in the land and he kind of walks around, and virtually one of the first events is that there is famine in the land. And what does Abraham have to do when there's famine?
Goes to Egypt.
Yeah. Right, he has to leave the land.
Mitzrayim.
So
Mitzrayim.
So he has to go to Mitzrayim. So he arrives in the land, and no longer he's arrived in the land, and then before you know it, he's got to leave and go into Mitzrayim. And then once the famine is over and the whole events of Egypt, he comes back. And as soon as he comes back, what happens next? We're told that there is a tension between his shepherds and the shepherds of Lot. And who's Lot? I want you to talk to me.
His nephew.
His nephew.
Right, Abraham's nephew. Okay, and he's more than just Abraham's nephew. At this point in time, what is Lot to Abraham really? He's more than just his nephew.
Son?
He's like a son. He's the heir. Abraham has no children. Abraham and Sarah have no children. And the obvious heir is Lot. So he arrives, he's get this big promise about land and progeny and so on, comes to the land, has to leave, comes back, has a terrible experience in Egypt with Paro, comes back, has tensions with Lot, and then he has to part ways with Lot. And they're standing, all of Abraham's life, he's on mountains. The big events take place on mountains, the man with vision. And he and Lot have to part. And it's not just the parting of the ways between him and his nephew. Not that Lot at this time is the heir. There's no one else in sight. So when Lot parts from Abraham, we see there's a sense of him losing his heir to potentially what Hashem promised him. And this is the story of Abraham. By the time we get to the end of Abraham's life, right, to the end of Sarah's life at least, when Sarah dies, which is just after the episode of the Akedah, Abraham, Vatamat Sarah, this is the second text, right? She dies. B'Kiryat Arba hi Hebron be'eretz Canaan. So she dies in the land of Canaan, and Abraham comes lisfod leSarah. He comes, he gives her hesped. He cries for her. You know, the sense of loss here is great. Now, what happens is that for a man who was told by God, I'm going to give your offspring this land. When Sarah dies, what is Abraham's state in terms of land and in terms of offspring at the death of Sarah? How's he doing in terms of land? I think everybody's gone to sleep. Okay. How much land does he own in Eretz Israel at the time of the death of Sarah? Well, we all know that he doesn't own.
He not own much because then he goes and buys Ma'arat HaMachpelah.
Right. He doesn't own, right, a skerrick of land. Not one drop of land. Nothing. He doesn't own a thing. And we're going to come to it in a second. He doesn't even have anywhere to bury Sarah. Okay. How is he doing in terms of offspring? Well, he's had a son called Ishmael, who's estranged from the family. And what's about his son Yitzchak? How are we doing there in terms of perhaps family building and so on? Not really well, not that great, because we know that Yitzchak is not even married. So he has a son now. He has a son who's estranged. So is Lot. And his one son, Yitzchak, who survived the trauma of the Akedah, is not married and has no children. So at the end of Sarah's life, which is coming towards the end of Abraham's life, he doesn't even have a plot of land in which to bury his wife. And what he has to do is he has to go, and we have this whole protracted negotiation with Bnei Chet and Ephron just to buy a grave. And in Pasuk Dalet there you can see where Abraham says, Ger v'toshav anochi imachem. Tnu li achuzat kever imachem ve'parai miti milefnai. He says, I'm a ger and a toshav, I'm a stranger here. Can you give me just a little plot of land so I can bury my dead? He doesn't possess anything even for that. And we know that there's a protracted negotiation here. And at the end, Abraham pays a lot of money just to buy this achuzat kever. Okay, it's quite sad when we think that throughout his life he's been promised all these things, and upon the death of Sarah, none of those promises have been fulfilled. And straight away after he buries Sarah, after he kind of negotiates, he pays the money, and at least he's got this achuzat kever. Because if you think about it, the worst thing that could happen to a person is not to actually have a burial place, not somewhere where you can actually say this is a place where that person has died. And Abraham works very hard to get Ma'arat HaMachpelah, and as we know, and pays a lot of money. And then what happens is straight away after all of that, the next pasuk, Abraham zaken ve'bav b'yamim. Okay, Abraham is old. Hashem berachet Abraham b'hakol. Hashem blessed him with everything, and there's this sense of irony here. He blessed him with everything. Chazal say it was a daughter, but we see here that it's a sense of irony, perhaps because we don't see what he has. And then what does Abraham do? Vayomer el avdo zeken beito. He gets his servant, and what does he tell his servants? Ishaba b'Hashem Elokei Shamayim asher lo tikach isha livni mibnot haKnani. He actually then begins the process of sending his servant. He's too old to do this himself, and he sends a servant to find a wife for Yitzchak. Velakachta isha livni Yitzchak. That is kind of one of the last things, in a way, that Abraham does. Now, from this story, what can we learn here about, perhaps, how do we understand hope? Can you define hope for me? Can you give me a sense of what hope means in terms of what this text, is this a text about hope? Let me ask you those kinds of questions. Do you see this as a text? Do you see hope in these texts?
I guess the fact that he's persevering, even though he doesn't have a logical reason to.
Right.
It's an idea that ties in with hope, generally speaking.
Okay. So hope is persevering even though there's no reason for it. Yes. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think there's hope because even though there are avenues that have been blocked off, there always seems to be a perseverance of certain, like, any option that is available. You know, like if financially he can't do anything, then he hopes for, you know, his offspring. If he can't rely on himself, he hopes for, you know, the next generations. I think, yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because what we do see here is that despite, you know, so quite often, you know, if you think about it, whenever, you know, on the death of a somebody who we really love, particularly a spouse, and when the spouse just dies, obviously people do, you know, despair. And we see that Abraham has pain. He comes, he cries, he gives he also fed. We feel that there's that pain, but there's no yeush. What do you know? What yeush is?
Despair.
Despair. In a sense, there's sadness and so on. And but we see here that Abraham doesn't despair, in a sense that even though after the death of Sarah, he acts to acquire that little piece of land. If he can't have for anything else, he can have somewhere to bury her, and where he and the family will be buried. There's an achuzat kever. And then he goes on and he says, okay, the next step is to find a wife for Yitzchak to continue. So the sense here is that even though at the time of the death of Sarah, Abraham appears to have very little, certainly the brachot have not been fulfilled, Abraham doesn't despair. He moves forward and he continues. And Jonathan Sachs here, if you have a look, writes, optimism is a passive virtue. Hope is an active one. It needs no courage, only a certain naivete to be an optimist. It needs a great deal of courage to have hope. The prophets of Israel were not optimists. When everybody else felt secure, they saw the coming catastrophe, but every one of them was still an agent of hope. So, thank you, Eddie. So, in a sense, that we see here that hope goes beyond optimism. This is not some just naive kind of everything's going to be fine, yeh beseder, yeh tov, but really hope comes from something that is deep, a belief. Right? A belief in a cause, in a virtue. And this begins with Abraham. And I think these texts about Abraham are kind of the opening texts of where we see kind of a very special hope that exists in the Torah. There are many other instances of hope. I want to just talk about one, and then I want to read another one, not actually that comes from the Torah, the Tanakh, but you'll see like in a minute. The other, I think, character who displays an incredible amount of hope. You can see Rabbi Akiva's coming up, but we're gonna hold. I didn't source this to you because I wanted actually to talk about this, and I think it's something that might be also, again, very familiar to you. What do we know about Moshe? I want to focus on Moshe's early life. What do we know? We know Moshe has a remarkable birth story. We all know about that. What are the things that we know about Moshe from kind of the time that he is weaned and, you know, matures a bit till the episode of the burning bush? What do we know about Moshe's life? We know his birth story. What do we know about Moshe sort of from the time he's weaned? Okay, so his birth story is, you know, on the story on the Nile, but Paro takes him, his mother then becomes his wet nurse. We know Miriam looked on the side. And then when he's weaned, he's brought back to Bat Paro, to Paro's daughter, and he grows up in the palace. From that time till God reveals himself in the burning bush, what do we know about Moshe from the text?
We know that he's a humble being.
Okay, we know he's humble. Okay, what else do we know? Give me examples. What happened?
He's got a lot of potential. Like, I mean, I guess it would be before he was taken out of the Nile, but there was a lot of hope in what the astrologers saw in the sky. They saw someone who could potentially be as powerful, if not greater, than the pharaoh that they had.
Okay, that's the midrash, of course, that talks about, you know, why Paro wanted to kill the firstborn. Okay, when Moshe is in the palace, what happens? What's the first thing that we know? Vayigdal Moshe. He grows up. He's in the palace. What's the next thing that happens? Vayitze.
He sees the two people fighting each other. I was trying to think, like, you mean like it shows leadership skills, or it shows, I don't know, his ability to criticize, or...
Okay, so let's have a look. I didn't source this. If you're interested in this, now I want to point out, this is what I'm going to share with you is an Nechama Leibovitz. It's kind of like, you know how sometimes you go to a restaurant and you know this, you know, you have to order this one dish because this is a signature dish of this restaurant. I guess, I don't know, in Noga it might be sushi, right? You can't go to Noga and not have their sushi. Well, this is Nechama Leibovitz's observation, and it's her kind of one of her signature ideas. But Moshe, he goes into Paro's. He's in Paro's. He grows up in Paro's palace. He's brought there by his mother, and it says Vayigdal Moshe. Okay, he goes out and he grows up, and he says the first thing he does is he goes out to see Bnei Israel. Vaya'ar besivlotam. He's going out to see not et sivlotam, but the besivlotam. Do you know what the difference is with the et and the be? You can say Vayar et sivlotam or Vaya'ar besivlotam. What's the difference between et and be in Hebrew? Okay, what does the letter bet mean? If you say lirot be, somebody
Within
said
something?
it? It's within, right? Okay, when the first thing that Moshe goes out, he goes to see his brothers. He knows he's part of Am Yisrael. His mother must have told it to him. And when he's in the palace, he grows up, he goes Vayar b'sivlotam. He goes not just to see their suffering, but to be part of their suffering. In other words, he's going in with a feeling that his nation, his people are being oppressed. On Seder night, it's not Lesaper et Yetziat, Lesaper b'sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, it's Lesaper be'Yetziat Mitzrayim. We have to feel. That's why we say, you know, we have to feel as though, B'chol dor v'dor chayav adam lirot et atzmo ki'ilu hu yatsa. We have to have that immersive experience. So when Moshe goes out, he goes to look, to feel what is happening with his brothers. And the first thing he sees is that there is an Ish Mitzri. The Egyptian is Makeh, who's beating an Israelite, right? He goes out, he sees this, and then the text then says, Vayifen chov v'chov, vayar ki ein ish. He turns this way, he turns that way, he sees that nobody is there, and he hits the Egyptian one blow, and he kills them. I think there's a word for that, you know, when you give somebody one blow and you unfortunately kill them. I'm not sure what it's called. So here Moshe, once again, he goes out to his brother, And he you know, and he sees no one else is helping, and therefore he tries, he you know, he tries to help this beaten slave. And the next day he goes out again, and this is where Eddie mentioned before, he sees two Israelites fighting, and he says to the wicked one, Lama taket re'acha, why are you hitting, you know, why are you hitting your friend? Probably he's trying to think, you know, there's so much beating around here, why do you have to continuously do this? And the man responds, are you going to kill me like you killed the Egyptian? And Moshe says, then the text tells us, Achen noda davar, and it became known, and then Paro knows about it, and then Moshe has to flee because Paro wants to kill him, and he goes to Midian. Now, in these two cases, Nechama Leibovich says the first time we've got an Egyptian hurting a Jew, right? And therefore we can understand that Moshe would turn around and he wants to defend the underdog. The second time he sees two Jews, you know, or two of Bnei Israel from his own nation, Nechama Leibovich points out once again, we can understand, you know, why he would interfere in these two conflicts. But the end result of Moshe getting involved in all of this is that he has to flee. His life, Paro wants to kill him, and he has to flee, and he flees to Midian. And he goes to the Midian, he's by the Be'er, by the well. He's homeless, he's stateless, and he's got nowhere to go by the well. And then what happens? He sees what? He sees these shepherdess, the Bnot Midian, and the shepherds are coming and they're shooing them away. And what does Moshe do again? This time, once again, he interferes. He says, he once again comes in on the side of the underdog. And Nechama Leibovich at this point points out that quite often, for most people, they would turn around and say, you know, oh, look, I can understand these were, you know, I interfere when it, you know, I want to get involved when it's my people, when it's Jews and so on. But here I am in Midian. I don't care what happens to the Midianites. These are not the people. These are not my nation. Anyway, I used to be idealistic. I used to try and think I could change the world. But now I realize it doesn't get you anywhere. It makes you homeless and stateless and so on. And what makes Moshe so unique as a leader is that in each one of these situations, so whether it's two of Bnei Israel, whether it's an Egyptian and another member of Bnei Israel, or two Midianites, in each one of these cases, Moshe wants to try and protect the underdog. And Nechama says anything else, any other stories is just a repetition. These three stories tell us a tremendous amount about Moshe. And once again, from Moshe, we see that someone like Moshe, we see that no matter what is happening, he feels the need, or he is the one who kind of speaks out because he believes the world can be something better. He believes in speaking out against injustice. And he never, ever gives up that hope that he can change things. And in this, and I think from here, we can see that Moshe really is an ideal person to be the leader, to be the person who will take Am Yisrael. If you feel so passionately about injustice, you're going to have a lot to say to Paro. And I think here there's an element, once again, of learning about hope, that vision of the future, that there's something that inside you, it's not just wishful thinking, it's something that comes from a deep belief that the future can be better, that the future can be changed, and it can be done by the actions that we do. We have hope in the future because of sometimes the things that we can do now to change that. Any comments, thoughts?
If that was his belief, why did he have such an issue with Hashem telling him to be the person to go and do that?
Right, okay. Good question. Any ideas?
That's your job.
Is that my job? I want to see if anybody else has some ideas as well. Otherwise, I'll take it.
Sorry, do you mind repeating the question?
Sure. No, I was just saying if that's what his belief was, you know, that something has to be done, whatever, then why did he have an issue with Hashem giving him that job later on?
Right. Okay, excellent. Anybody, why if that's the case and he has a hope, why doesn't he want to take on the leadership straight away? Why does Hashem Azor have to convince him that he is?
Well, I remember learning previously about Moshe in the text that he's a very humble being, and I don't know if that we just had a share on this the other day about similar about how sometimes self-esteem can be looped with humility, and like how do you actually separate those as two different entities altogether? Because if you think of like the most humble person that you can think of, they probably appear as if they don't stand up for themselves. And I don't know, like this is a pretty huge job. I mean, hope can be such a dangerous weapon as well, so I don't know, like it's a pretty big deal. Right.
I think there's something at the same time, while Moshe has the courage, there's a humility and a sense of, Mi anochi asher elech leparo, do I have what it takes to go? And we see this kind of two parts to Moshe's personality. On the one hand, this humility, but a humility that at the same time is a man also of enormous power and strength. He can do it, and he proves that he does. And therefore, I think it's interesting that there's a sense of Moshe having vision, Moshe having inner resilience, Moshe being hopeful always for the future, but at the same time, this man of incredible humility. But finally, when God says to him, you're going to go, Moshe certainly goes, and he gives it everything that he has. Even though he's a stutterer and he finds it difficult, once again, he has that ability. So I think this text gives us a little bit of an insight on hope. And the reason I think I chose these texts is I kind of feel that we're living through a period in which I think hope is a little bit, hope is being weakened in our society. We're seeing some sort of very, very sad and challenging events occurring around us. And I think there is an element of sort of a lack of hope for where we're heading, especially in places like America. I think there's that sense. And I was very and I was intrigued on how do we as Jews particularly see and feel about hope. And I want to kind of do one more text with you, and then I want to perhaps finish off and try and really see how we understand hope and what hope means to us, and try and have a look at that. So one more text, and this is a text from the Gemara. It's one of my kind of favorite stories about Rabbi Akiva. Those of you who know me know that I absolutely, I could spend all day talking about Rabbi Akiva. And just by way of a little bit of background, all of you know Rabbi Akiva was, how did he start off his life? Was he a big Talmid Chacham at a young age?
No.
No, not at all. In fact, he is
BT. Right,
he's a real BT, that is true. And when did he become a BT? What age did he become a BT?
40.
At the age of 40. And we have texts that actually say that he actually not only was a BT, but he didn't really like Talmidei Chachamim at all. He, one side said, like they're pretty useless. And there are two different narratives of how Rabbi Akiva became a BT. The one that we all love is the story of Rachel, the love story. And then there's another one which talks about how he himself kind of sees the well and he sees the water, and he says, if water can kind of make stone soft, what could Torah potentially do for me? And we know that Rabbi Akiva goes to learn Torah. He starts with the alphabet, and he learns with the little children. He learns the alphabet and so on, until eventually he gets into. He doesn't go to Gush Edi. The next thing he does, he actually goes to the yeshiva of Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Eliezer in a place called Yavna. He goes and learns there. and he begins to develop, and for a while, by the way, they ignore him, Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Eliezer. He actually goes and asks them lots of questions, and within a shortish period of time, he becomes a great scholar and a great leader. And the text in front of us is a text that occurs later on after the Churban. Rabbi Akiva lives in the most terrible period of Jewish history, as we all know. He lives through the period of the Churban, of the destruction of the temple. And this story is about Rabban Gamliel, Rabbi Eliezer, and Rabbi Yoshua, and Rabbi Akiva. And Hayu Malchim, they're going towards Jerusalem. Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua are his teachers, and Rabban Gamliel is, who's Rabban Gamliel? Rabban Gamliel is the head. Okay, you'll tell me in a minute, all right? So, Shuv Pam Achat Hayu Olim Liyerushalayim. These four men are coming. Kevan shehigiu lehar tzufim karu bigdehem. There is a custom that existed, and some people still keep it today, where when people arrive on Mount Scopus, when they would arrive on Mount Scopus, they would do a kriya. Okay, they would tear a garment. Why would they be tearing a garment on Har Tzufim?
Because that's where you'd see Har Habayit.
Right.
And
What stands?
Korban.
Right. What stands today on Har Tzufim?
Isn't there an Australian museum? I mean, it's not the main thing.
It used to be the Australian consulate was there. Something big is on Har Tzufim today, the Hebrew University. There's the Hadassah Hospital as well. So if any of you get a chance to be at the Hebrew University, if you go into the shul at the Hebrew University, the back of the shul is a window, okay? And you can imagine, what do you see out the back window? The whole of the view of Yerushalayim, the old city. And you can actually go out and go all the way down, and if you kind of head, you can stand there and overlook from the back Har Habayit. And I think there's actually a picture of, I'll double check, but so there's a picture of one of the famous rabbis doing Kriya. So here, Rabbi Akiva, Rabban Gamliel, and Rabbi Yoshua are all on Har Hazeitim, and they're coming. On Har Tzufim, they do Kriya, and Kevan shehigiu lahar habayit. Now they're walking towards. They can't go into Yerushalayim because we know it's after destruction. It's after the decrees. Yerushalayim has been turned into Helena Capitolina, and they can't actually go in. But where they're standing and looking as they're heading, they can see. Shehigiu lahar habayit ra'u shu'al yotzeh mibeit kodshei hakedoshim. They knew already, even though the temple was destroyed, they knew where the Kodesh HaKodashim was, and they could see a fox walking where the Kodesh HaKodashim. Itchilu bochim, and they start crying. So, and Rabbi Akiva misachek, and Rabbi Akiva starts laughing. So Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Eliezer, and Rabbi Yoshua are crying, and Rabbi Akiva is laughing, or he's happy. Amrulo, the rabbis say to him, Mipnei ma ata misachek? Why on earth would you be laughing? They just asked why you are laughing. I've added that. Why Mipnei ma ata misachek? Why were you laughing? Amar lahem mipnei ma atem bochim. He looks at them and says, why are you crying? And initially we look at this text and we say, this is absurd. All of them are looking at the same thing. They're looking at the destruction of the temple. They can see the Churban, and they can all see a fox walking out of what once used to be the Kodesh HaKodashim. And they're crying. Rabbi Akiva's laughing. And they say, how can you cry? And Rabbi Akiva just can't fathom. How can you not laugh? How can you not be joyful? Right? And then they respond, Amru lo, מקום שכתבו בו, והזר הקרב ימות, עכשיו שואלים הילכו בו ולא אבכה? They said to him, what do you mean? This is a place where it says in Sefer Bamidbar, if a stranger comes into the Kodesh HaKodashim, what would happen to them? They would die. You know, you walk in, it's a place of what was the holiest place. Anybody, except for the Kohen Gadol and Yom Kippur, who went near it would die straight away. And now there are foxes walking. We wouldn't cry. In other words, the haram, it's all the kedusha is gone. There's complete and utter churban. God's presence has left. And they say to him, well, what else? What, we wouldn't cry? How? There's no other way to respond to what we have seen. And Rabbi Akiva responds, Lachen ani mesachek. That's exactly why I am laughing. Okay? And we sit here and before we read, we say to ourselves, what do you mean that's why you are laughing? שנאמר ויבדל לי עבדים נאמנים את אוריה הכהן ואת זכריהו בן יברכהו. Now what we have to understand is why it is. And Rabbi Akiva then explains, וכי מה עניין אצל אוריה ואצל זכריה? Now here Rabbi Akiva says that there are two prophecies. One is the prophecy of Uriah about the first temple, and one is the prophecy of Zechariah on the second temple. Ella, and then he goes on and he says that, if I'm just skipping a little bit, and it says, "Uriah ne'emar lachem b'galchem Tzion tzadeh techarash v'Yerushalayim inyan v'tiyeh har habayit lebamot ya'ar." He says in the prophecy of Uriah, it talks about the destruction. Everything's going to happen. It's going to be destroyed. And that's kind of, that there's a prophecy of destruction. But in the prophecy of Zechariah, later on, he says that there is also a prophecy that says, עוד ישבו זקנים וזקנות ברחובות ירושלים. עד אשר לא נתקיימה נבואתו של אוריה, הייתי מתייאש שלא יתקיים נבואה של זכריה. עכשיו נתקיימה נבואתו של אוריה, ביודע שנבואתו של זכריה היא מתקיימת. Rabbi Akiva says, I'm laughing because there was a prophecy of Uriah, which was a prophecy of destruction. But there's also a prophecy of Zechariah, which is a prophecy that we will come back. And he said, until I could see that there was destruction, I didn't know that there could be rebuilding. And therefore, he said, now I know the prophecy of Zechariah is going to come true. Od yishvu zkenim v'zkenot b'rchovot Yerushalayim. He says, I know that there will be old people sitting in Jerusalem. Ubilashon ze amru lo. And then they all said to him, Akiva nechamtanu, Akiva nechamtanu. Akiva, you have comforted us. Akiva, you have comforted us. Now, what's so remarkable about this text? And what does it tell us about hope?
I guess that it could be more logical than naive.
Okay, so firstly, sorry, go on. No, it goes. So
I guess hope just, it seems to be naive in general. Just, it seems to be like you're holding on to something that might not exist. Whereas the way in which Akiva looks at it is that it's more this belief and assurance that, and this awareness that, Hashem's followed through before and so is going to do so again. So it's quite logical.
Okay, excellent. Anybody else want to add? What's interesting is that you can imagine this scene where they're all standing there and they're all seeing exactly the same thing, right? The four rabbis, the four Gdolei Hador, are seeing exactly the same thing. They're overlooking Har Habayit and they see a fox coming out of the Kodesh HaKodashim. And for the three Rabbanim, and perhaps for all of us, our first reaction would be, simply to cry, okay? To despair at the fact that this, not only is the temple destroyed, not only is the Kodesh HaKodashim gone, but the Kedusha, God's presence himself, has disappeared. And our first reaction is probably to do exactly what Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Eliezer, and Rabbi Gamliel have did. But Rabbi Akiva's reaction is completely different. They're looking at the same thing. They see Churban. Rabbi Akiva sees Geula. They see despair. Rabbi Akiva sees hope in the future. And I think here, what we can learn here is, I think, something very important about hope. That sometimes hope comes from a fundament. It's not just the optimism, yeah, Tov, as I said, but really it comes from a belief that there's something bigger, that Rabbi Akiva sees that there's a future for Am Israel. Even though there's destruction, there is a future for the people. They will come back. This is the message of the Nevi'im. And I think also for all of us, if we want to understand hope, I think quite often in our days, I think we've seen tremendous amount of hope in the Jewish people. And that is that, what I mean by that, I mean, not us, but perhaps our parents, and in your case, maybe your grandparents, went through, I think, a huge Churban. And that Churban, of course, what was a Churban perhaps of the 19th century is, of course, the Shoah. And yet, after the Shoah, we see that for a lot of people, they didn't give up. They didn't give in completely to despair. People had children, people built families, people rebuilt communities, people rebuilt yeshivot, right? And perhaps the biggest miracle, one of the biggest miracles, was that we came back to Eretz Israel as well. So we see that there's something, that hope is something that exists, that we feel that we have something in us that can shape and impact the future. Are you able to read that part from Jonathan Sachs? Can you see it or not?
Clicking on me. Yes, sure.
No.
I'd love to.
Okay.
I've met many survivors of the camps and others who have lost entire families there. They still bear the marks of that trauma. How could they not? In many cases, it took them 50 years before they could even talk about their memories. Yet I'm struck by their passion for life, by their tenacious hold on it. In small ways, and sometimes large, they have worked to build a different world, I'm guessing.
Yes, sorry, world. It's my typo.
No, it's all right. In which such murderous hatreds are no longer possible. Some kept their faith in God, others lost it, but most kept their faith in life. They did not give up or give into resentment and bitterness or lapse into the nightmare of victimhood. Do you want me to keep going?
Yes.
Yes. Somehow they persevered between the lineaments of hope. Nowhere do I find more clearly than in these survivors the difference between optimism and hope. Optimism is the belief that things are going to get better. Hope is the belief that we can make things better. Optimism is a passive virtue. Hope is an active one. It takes no courage to be an optimist, but it does need courage to hope.
Okay. So I think from here we can see that each one of these stories that we've looked at, these texts, not stories, the texts that we've looked at, gives us an insight on kind of how we as the Jewish people see hope. And if you have a look, we're going to come to Eli Wiesel at the moment, but at the bottom, I've put the quote from Zechariah, Ko amar Hashem tzvaot. This is what the Lord of Hosts says. He said, Od yishvu zkenim v'zkenot b'rechovot Yerushalayim. There will come a time where there will be old people sitting in the streets of Jerusalem. Ve'ish mishtanto biyado merov yamim. Each one of them will hold a stick because of their age. In other words, they have a walking stick. Urchovot ha'ir yimalu yeladim ve'yeladot misachakim berchovotea. And the city will have children playing in its streets. Now, this vision every time, by the way, every time when I'm in Yerushalayim and I see sort of old people or I see children, I can't help but think about the prophecy of Zechariah that we are the generation that has merited to see the Skenim and Skenot sitting in the Rehovot Yerushalayim. By the way, the old people is a sense, not just that there's old people, but people who have reached longevity, that life has been good so that old people can survive. And I think how many generations of Jews had read that text and never ever had seen it. And we are the lucky generation that often gets to walk through the streets of Yerushalayim. And Be'ezrat Hashem, those of you who haven't been, this is what I want to leave you with, that we will see it. There's nothing more joyful than seeing old people and little children in the streets of Yerushalayim. And we have merited to see that. So when we have this kind of hope, right, this is something that we carry with us on who we are, and we have that kind of view and influence onto the future. And therefore, when Rabbi Akiva shows it, they say, Akiva nechamtanu, Akiva, you have comforted us, Akiva nechamtanu, and they repeat it twice, nachamu nachamu ami, we find comfort. If you have a look, just what does it mean to be a Jew? In Hebrew, a Jew means Ivri. Okay, Ivri Hebrew comes from the root Ever, Ayin Bet Resh, from the other side. It also comes from the word Avar, past. And the text and the next metamorphosis of the word is Ha'avara, transmission. A Jew, an Ivri, a Hebrew, is the one who transmits the past to the future. A Jew, I believe, is someone who transmits his own experiences to his children. But transmit he must. Transmit what and how? I believe this transmission must be total. It must be almost on the level of existence. One transmits one's doubts, one's anguish, one's joys, one's hopes, one's despairs, one's nostalgia for the past and hope for the future. And that's, of course, from none other than Elie Wiesel. So there is a kind of sense of connecting past to the future, that where we bring the promise of the past, the joys of the past, the Brit Avot, right? We bring everything that the Torah has to offer us, and we bring it with us, and we bring it in now and into the future. And I think that is part of what I think hope is really all. No text in all of it, and this is my little thought. No text in all of literature is so evocative of the fate of the Jewish people after the Holocaust, before the rebirth in 1948 of the State of Israel. Almost prophetically, Naftali Herzimbar alluded to this text in his words for the song that eventually became Israel's national anthem. He wrote, Od lo avda tikvatenu, our hope is not yet lost. Not by accident is Israel's national anthem called Hatikva, the hope. Hatikva, by the way, those words were written in, I think there's a dispute, 1887, 1888. And therefore I think that it's so befitting that when we're talking about hope, Od lo avda tikvatenu, Hatikva bat shnot alpayim, liot am chofshi be'artzenu eretz Zion v'Yerushalayim, and that these words that were written so long ago still apply today. So I hope that in a period perhaps that there is a little bit of despair in what's going on around the world, that there is a timeless, I think, remedy for despair. And that timeless remedy is a hope, and it's an ancient hope that we all carry around with us. And I think whether we transmit it, our Elie Wiesel talks about transmission, whether it's as parents what we transmit to our children, or as teachers what we transmit to our students, and as madrichim what we transmit to our chanichim. What we're doing in every single one of these acts, every time we learn Torah, we fulfill mitzvot, we teach, we give a shiur, we do a peula. what we're doing is giving something from ourselves, from the past and from the present, and hopefully building into the future. And I think that's what kind of has kept the Jewish story alive, the Jewish story and the Jewish people alive through 2,000 years of exile and misery and persecution. It's that hope that there is going to be a future for Am Israel. So I thank you, and I wish you a lot of hatzlacha with everything that you are doing and the work you're doing. So
Thank you so much.
Oh, yeah.
Thank
everyone
you.
and B'nai.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate that.
My pleasure. I wish you continued success with what you're doing.
Thank you.
Shavua Tov. Shavua Tov, everybody. Hello, Tali.